for JMAP, you can read your mail. There seems to be one or two people in the back doing that. So let's get started.
Cool. All right. This is an IETF meeting, so note the note well. It's the same as last time and something like that. This is the agenda that we came up with, rough overview of what we're planning to do in the next little while. If there's anything else you want to add, now's a good time to hop up and throw that in there.
And we'll chuck the blue sheet off to Bernie.
Yeah. Thanks, Lexi. All right, I sent an email about the rechartering to the list, and I've got that here to pop up on the screen so we can discuss it when we get to that. So let's start with Neil and JMAP Core.
Is this thing on? Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm hoping this is actually going to be probably quicker than we had on the agenda. I'm just going to give a quick status update, I guess. So JMAP Core is in last call, has been for a little while, and we plan to finish that on the 16th, so about a week after this IETF conference finishes. There have been small revisions since IETF 102, but mainly it's editorial fixes. I've gone through and made sure the JSON now passes and isn't full of syntax errors, and they fixed some grammatical nits, and people have sent small amounts of feedback which have been incorporated, such as making account ID explicit rather than letting it be optional, because then if it changed what was the default on the server, you could get very confused as a client. And added some state management, so copy and import are consistent with set. We've got a couple of implementations out there in Cyrus in C, and X, which is a Perl implementation, and Apache James have got an implementation as well, though it's based on a slightly older version of the spec than now. There's no open issues on GitHub, and so basically we're just waiting for any more final reviews from people coming in. I know a few more people are reading the spec at the moment. We'll hopefully see that on the list over the next few days. Again, I'm not expecting any major issues, just, again, small spec nits, grammatical changes, things that need to be clarified. And then hopefully, 16th we'll close and submit to the next step. So I guess at this stage, just wanted to see if anyone in the room had any queries, comments, or concerns about JMAP Core, or is everyone happy that that is probably a reasonable summary and we're good to continue like that? Lexi's hands up.
Probably no answer to my question, but I'll ask it anyway. So JMAP Core is used as a base for mail and calendaring and other things. Does it need to be held to be validated by more than JMAP mail? Just to see that, it contains the right amount of information and sufficiently independent for them.
Well, it depends what you mean by validation. I mean, we've certainly got experience using a number of different contexts that aren't mail, quite a few. And I think what has happened is it's in terms of the two specs, they very much become data model in mail, which is just like the objects and stuff, and core is all the kind of methods and synchronization primitives and stuff, and that seems to be a very clean separation.
So you're sufficiently happy with the primitives that it's sufficiently extensible?
I would say so, yes. And we've got quite a bit of experience trying that with various different domains. Contacts, calendars, files, a whole different app that's none of those things.
All right.
It's worked pretty well across all of them.
I guess the other thing to add there is that every additional thing can also extend JMAP Core with what it needs.
Yeah.
JMAP Core is a base that it can build upon, but it doesn't have to use the same methods.
Yeah, we'd like JMAP Core to have all the... Exactly, yeah. We want a JMAP Core to have all the generic stuff in, but we're pretty confident that it does at this point. And there will be other extensions you can put on top for specific things, but yeah, I think the separation is reasonably good.
So basically, I wanted to raise, you can have some requests that span several account ID. For instance, if I'm doing some text search in a mailbox and I wish to aggregate the results across different accounts, for example, in case of mail share. And the current model with account ID does not support this. So I think that is a point that might need to be discussed as part of JMAP core, I assume. It is not specific to the email object. That's why I raised the point.
I put in a slide to discuss this after your email this morning. I actually put it as part of mail, but maybe it's a discussion with core. Let's move on to generic mail, and then we'll get to the slide about that, and we'll talk about it then. Yeah. Okay, so move on. So JMAP mail, the other spec is basically same status. Had small revisions, but I think it's in a very good shape. Last call finishes at the same time. Again, there have been at least 3 implementations I know of, although again, of various versions of the spec as it has developed. Cyrus is the one that's most up to date with the current and is fully up to date with the current spec. The other 2 are based on older versions, but I think we have got significant implementation experience, especially for a spec at this stage. Again, no open issues on GitHub, so awaiting any final nits and reviews on the mailing list or elsewhere, and then we'll move that on the 16th of November. So again, are there any specific comments or queries or concerns about mail in that respect? No? Cool. All right, so if we go on to the next slide, this is the point that Benoit raised. So it's an interesting question. In JMAP, you have accounts as a kind of isolation unit. So everything happens generally within an account, and you can copy data between accounts, but like you don't have the same consistency guarantees. Like IDs must be unique within an account. You can kind of lock the account as you're making a change. You have an old state and new state, and only your changes happened within that. And to make this scalable across lots and lots of users and stuff, this is a really nice property. At the same time, as a user, you might be given access to multiple accounts. For example, if I'm sharing my mail with Bron, he might be able to see mail from my account as well. So the issue that's raised is if you want to present some kind of single view of stuff between different accounts, like a unified inbox, what's the best way to achieve this? Now, one way you could do this is just to aggregate in the client. You make a query to both the accounts, take the data, you merge the 2, show it. But for some clients, they may want to put this on the server instead, make this so that they can be simpler. So what's the best way to achieve this? So I came up with a couple of ideas, which I put on the mailing list. One is just to simply set up your server so that the users that do share stuff are all within a single account, but that loses you various properties that make that a pain. I don't think that's actually a good solution. As for a start, you'd have name clashes. You know, if you both wanted something called inbox, but they're in the same account, well, that's a clash. So you couldn't have that. So that doesn't really work, having 2 different users' stuff share that. So I guess the other solution then is, do we want some way for the server to aggregate this data from the different accounts? Is this best as an extension? Is this something that's very generic? And any ideas or comments on this, I guess?
So, Kurt Anderson. I think the problem here is that it is conflating the user experience with the implementation details. That I might have accounts on multiple servers, not to mention multiple services, each of which have multiple servers, and want a unified view in some sort of a client. There is absolutely no way that the spec can say, oh yeah, let's just aggregate the world and give you one view. And so I don't think we should try.
Absolutely. I mean, that was my initial view, and that's why I always presumed a client would do this if it needed to, so it could do the same across accounts, which is why it's not in there. But there is still a use case potentially on a single server where which does have access to both. Yeah, I guess, is this worth addressing? I think, to be clear, if we did, it would definitely be an extension. This doesn't seem something that's integral to the spec as a whole, and I think it would be something that servers could add support for if they wanted. I guess the question is there enough interest in actually defining that as an extension, or is there something that is best left to the client or a custom extension for particular vendors?
Alexei, speaking from the floor, at the moment, I'm not entirely sure how this extension is going to look like. So
I think it would basically...
if somebody that does a proposal, it might help to decide.
That's a fair point. I mean, I think it would basically just be for querying. It wouldn't be aggregating anything else. And I guess instead of returning a list of IDs, you'd get something like a list of account ID tuples back in an object. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, this is John Levine. It doesn't sound like we have this. It sounds like this is very far from being fully baked. And my suggestion would be like go build a shim or something that actually does it. And if, you know, and if it turns out to be useful, you know, and better than the way MUAs let you query multiple IMAP sources, then we should think about adding it.
Yep. Okay. I think in that case, Benoit, I think this is kind of a thing for you, as you know, you've got the use case.
Do you want to speak to that?
Do you want to?
Yeah. The use case that might be useful.
Basically, my concern with having separate query on different accounts is that we lost the sort and the ordering and the relevance of results, basically.
Well, you would have the sort, like if you query two different ones but with the same sort, you can obviously interleave the two results by just comparing that small set of results together, which would get them into the right sort.
I agree that you have two lists or more lists that are ordered, so doing the order. But like if you do text search, then it's not easy to necessarily have the score whatsoever to be doing the ordering on the client side.
You definitely need to fetch whatever the ordering property was, and
so you don't see.
Maybe the solution is just to return the score or something like this alongside with the ID, so that we are able to perform the merge on the client side.
That sounds to me a lot like search snippets, in that it's a extra data item that only applies to the thing within the context of the search. And so you could definitely, just add an extension or something to fetch that relevant score that you're talking about for your search, get search relevance instead of get search snippets. And that would then, give you the information you need to do this on the client. That might be a lot simpler than trying to do this aggregation thing. So, cool. Well, I think then in terms of kind of action points.
If we've got a couple of minutes, I might talk about how Fastmail used to do it, which is basically item number one there. We had a thing called xconv multisort, which was an IMAP extension, and it returns a list of folder names that the messages are in at the start, and then it returns a list of tuples, which are a UID and a number into that folder name list for each item, which is basically that tuples of account ID and ID within the account. And that worked fine. Obviously, it's a much more complex data form that's being transferred across the wire, and it only works if all the accounts are on the same server.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think that it sounds like that's something that's particularly worth standardizing or that people would want to use in general.
Standardized as an extension if we think it's something that would be used, or that you could write up as an extension yourself for your client server.
Yeah, John Levine, just a general comment that given this how complex the spec is already, I really would be happy to have somebody say, here is some running code that we can work on. Particularly for this, you can hack on your server, or you could mock it up as a shim. It seems to me like you write some code and bring it back to us, and if we like it, we'll say great, we'll add it. Yeah,
I think there seems to be general consensus here that this is definitely not part of the core spec or a general thing. It's an extra addition that could be added on, and so it would be an extension. And at this point, the best thing is, perhaps Benoit, if you have want to write up how you think it should work, whether that's just fetching the relevance with the search or whether it's something that aggregates results. There's completely different options, but if then we can obviously look at that as a group on the list and see if that's something we think is useful enough generally to standardize as an extension. But I don't think this is seems to be part of the current specs of core mail, and so I don't think this is blocking what we're doing at the moment moving forward with those. Okay, that's all on that. Move on. So, JMAP extensions. So with mail and core hopefully essentially done, there have already been a few proposals for extensions that people would like to see that we might want to work on within the group, and I think hopefully still within the charter, although we'll talk about the charters later. So I think we've got two we want to briefly bring up. So the first one is about generating MDNs. This is an extension from Linagora again, which was about having an easy method of generating an MDN for a message to send back to the original if it was requested. So I don't know what we discussed at lunch now. Did you want to say something about this extension now? Or?
So basically, the send MDN method had been proposed. There had not been much discussion on the topic, as far as I know. So clearly, we should move forward with this. Personally, I'd like to have a bit of use case of how to use MDN reference to the MDN sends keyword, and maybe to the reference to header for having an idea from an implementer point of view of how to be using JMAP to be sending, requesting MDN, and managing state of MDN. So just adding some little sentences just to put the MDN context in that spec.
Okay. Yes, I need to review it properly and send some comments, but I did read through it again this morning. I think the general idea seems fine. It needs updating a bit to conform with the latest this JMAP kind of standard way of doing things and naming conventions. But it's a fairly simple extension that, it sends the MDN. I think the idea of having a more complete discussion about how this fits into the whole process of getting delivery notifications and what you would have to set if you wanted them, and how, well, at least referencing the relevant RFCs, but having a short description certainly helps if someone comes across this to get a complete understanding of what this is about, what it's for. But I think this could be a good extension. Anyone else, any comments in terms of accepting or not this as part of the working group?
I read it and it was very non-controversial. I think it was useful and a good job. So
cool. So I think, again, we'll look hopefully to, I'll send through a bit more of a review about just the JMAP style nits, and if we can have those fixed and maybe add in the discussion that you want to add in that you were talking about, and then we can review that and go from there. But this looks like, something that will be good.
Yeah, it's going to depend on core and mail being delivered before this one
it won't be
can make
rushed through.
The process, so it's still a little way off being standard, obviously, but it should travel through with them, I imagine, given the timelines.
I probably would leave it afterwards just so that if you've not got so much stuff pushing into a queue at once. But
it will take less time in last call.
Obviously, it's much simpler as a specification.
At the far end.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone have anything else to say about MDNs? I imagine not. Cool. Do you want to go back to the... So the other main extension we have proposed at the moment is about using WebSockets as an alternative transport mechanism. So there's a couple of open questions on this. The So the proposal at the moment is to be able to use WebSockets as an alternative for sending the API requests back and forth. That's all your structured data, which I think would be potentially useful. It gives you certainly some performance advantages at the moment in terms of not having to re-authenticate every request, which could be expensive depending on your authentication mechanism. And also WebSockets now having pretty good widespread support for compressing uploads as well as the downloads, whereas HTTP generally not much support for gzipping uploads at the moment in clients. So that's so I think it would be a nice thing to support. I think the extension's worthwhile. The open questions at the moment, there are two main ones. Firstly, about out of order responses. So with HTTP, you might make concurrent connections to the API server, API resource to send method calls concurrently. There's obviously they could interleave an execution. They're not guaranteed to anything about how the concurrency works in terms of which one executes first. But that's fine if you know that the two requests are independent, and that can give you a boost. With WebSockets, you presumably don't want to create multiple WebSocket connections to the server. That seems a waste. But does that mean if you send one request down and then send another request before the first response comes back, is the server allowed or indeed meant to execute those in parallel and just return the responses in the order that they happen, or are each of those sequential and only executes the next request once it's finished that previous one that you've sent? Does that make sense? Yes, good. Anyone got any comments on that? I personally, I think it makes, you want to be able to replace concurrent HTTP requests with a single WebSocket. So it should execute them out of order just as soon as it receives them and then send the results back. I guess the issue potentially you have here is rate limiting. So at the moment you have, you can define a limit on the number of concurrent HTTP requests and the number of method calls you can make within a single request. How does that interact with this? Can you still have concurrent WebSocket requests, and can you have multiple requests outstanding within each of those? Does that make sense? No.
Yes, and why not?
Well, so it's about
I think
enforcing.
WebSocket
It's about
is
enforcing.
designed for this, right?
Sorry.
WebSocket is sort of designed for this. You can use any access pattern as you want.
Sure. I think then we've got to make sure that the rate limits define what makes sense, in that you don't want a client to be able to overwhelm the server with work. You don't want to be able to resource exhaustion. So you've got an extra dimension in terms of you've got concurrent connections, which is how, but each concurrent connection can have multiple requests in flight at a time now, whereas a concurrent HTTP request, each one is one request. And so that's why you need this extra limit, or you need to make sure the limits apply across all of these things.
I think it's certainly worth adding some text describing what the server should do if the limit is exceeded with specific error code. So responses that,
So I guess, presuming we want to be able to do these, out of order requests, it means that we're going to have to add some kind of tag to the request object so that can correlate it with the response object with which request you sent, which seems straightforward enough. But
Or you could just never reuse client IDs, and then you'll know.
You could, yes. Yeah, I guess it seems that would work, but it seems nice in some ways to be able to say this whole request object corresponds with this whole response object to me. But yes, you could just look at the client IDs in the method calls and see which ones corresponded. Okay, so it seems that that seems fairly straightforward. Then I'll ask Ken to update the draft with that, and we'll put it on the list as well to just make sure no one has objections. But I think, we want to be able to do out of order requests. So the other outstanding issue on this was, can you scroll up to the top? I can't remember. Is this 01?
Yes, 01.
Scroll. Oh, there it is. Oh, yeah. So this is just for API requests, sending and receiving. But we also have the event source connection you can make in order to get push notifications that state has changed, and therefore you should make a new API request to update your state to the latest. Now, obviously, WebSockets are bidirectional, so should you be able to send the pushes straight down this as well? So you replace your event source connection as well as your API requests. You just have a single connection to the WebSocket, and that use both for sending and getting API responses and also for receiving the push notifications.
I would say yes. You've already got a socket open that you can push things down.
Yeah, we implement something similar to this, which is not JMAP yet, but it will eventually be converted, and we use the same channel to push notifications.
Okay, I think that sounds reasonable as well. So in that case, we'll need some kind of, tag on the response object to say, what is this? Is this a response to an API request, or is this a push notification? Yeah, unsolicited thing. So we'll need some kind of common property on the top level JSON object, probably @type might be it's been used in other specs, to say, what is this type of message you've just received? Yeah. Okay, I think I'm happy that, I think that both of those questions that we have good solutions, and I'll ask Ken to write that up. But then I think it's not actually a complicated, it's not a long spec, mostly it's just use this. Sorry, Ken Murchison wrote this draft. So we'll, it just uses the standard upgrade connection to WebSocket, and then everything else just happens as it normally does in JMAP.
Would you like another issue?
Yes, please do.
Would you like to do this over HTTP2?
So
because
this draft,
now that there is WebSocket, there is WebSocket over HTTP2, so
there is. This draft actually does have an example of setting up a WebSocket over HTTP2 based on the latest
never
spec.
mind then. That's fine.
Yeah, Ken has already, I believe, implemented this with HTTP2 as well as HTTP1. I'll have to check.
The nice thing is this is Barry, if it's geared toward WebSockets, it doesn't really matter what goes under the WebSocket.
It's the initial upgrade.
Possibly, but just, make sure that there is a reference to it also works with HTTP2 type stuff.
Yeah, there's actually, I think if you scroll down, it shows the data flow happening in both HTTP1 and HTTP2.
So I guess I will post something to the mailing list asking if there are any objections to accepting this document as a working group product.
Sounds good. Great.
Are there any objections in the room to accepting this as a working group product? Okay, hearing none.
Sounds good. Actually, really quite want to try implementing this on the client side as well, so you can see what the performance is like. So I think this could be a nice benefit. Anyway, cool. Should we move on? I think that's that. Cool. Were there any other extensions? I think there was.
Yeah, there was one from me.
Yes, Alexei.
Which is probably expired. I was trying to find it recently, but I didn't. So it was a fairly simple SMIME related extension. I don't actually remember whether we accepted it or whether it was still a.
It's not appearing in the documents list.
Do you search if you search for expired drafts? Does it come up if you search for JMAP? No, I think you just need to search for JMAP, and then, unfortunately, then you need to search again for expired drafts.
It's waiting.
Okay. Well, it's probably there isn't much point to discuss it. Additional search criteria and expired.
Jonas, Google it. Might be quick.
Well, let's not do this today. Okay. I'm sure I haven't imagined this. It's at least some other people remember me writing something about this. So, yeah, I would be surprised if I didn't put JMAP in the name. So it's just a bit. Anyway, I'll dig it out.
Do you want to give a quick summary again, just of what it was?
So I think it was doing just SMIME signature verification status as a separate attribute.
So yeah, so the server had the key and did the verification, and just added a property to the message to say whether it verified.
Actually, it doesn't need the key, because it just, as long as it have root CA and can access it just. But there is a question of whether we want to do more like server-assisted decryption or encryption and signing, this sort of thing.
So I guess it's kind of a question of, you could have just a simple extension which is did it verify, and then a separate one for doing more complex stuff, or do you try and have a single one that encompasses all the different things you might want to do with SMIME?
So you're going to store your private key on the server for...
Well, that's the downside of it. Yeah, you have to trust it. So maybe for this reason, it's good to have two separate documents, because for signature verification, you don't need any private keys on the server. Yeah,
that seems worth having two separate.
Yes.
Yeah, then you have two separate, well, you could do this in one document, but having two documents makes it easier to have two separate capability strings, so that you can say, I support this and not that, or this and that.
Yes, and if people dislike one of them, it's easier to discuss which part they dislike.
And I can certainly see servers that don't want people sending them their private keys.
So. True, but in corporate settings, it's also quite common to have the gateway server.
Yes, well, we have examples both ways.
Yes.
I think Gmail does SMIME server side already, so.
So this is the spec. It was emailed to the list. Has 4 possible values on a property that you can fetch on a message. Obviously, everything's changed now in email.
Yeah, the syntax has changed, but that's not important. This is just an extra property on the email object. That's fine. So unknown, signed. Yeah.
And if you start supporting decryption, that there are more states there, but that's just a sort of a well-known list of things.
That seems reasonable to me.
Obviously, completely out of band here is all the key management and trust management on your certificate chain.
Well, not for
that. All this is.
Oh, for getting your CA, who you trust and everything.
Yes,
yeah.
This is DKG. So the signed verified, in addition to the question about trust management on the server side, there could easily be 2 certificates that match all the things identified in this paragraph, right? So signed verified just says we believe some certificate matched, but there's nothing that you can use on the client side to log, for example, key continuity discovery or something like that.
So are you saying you would like more information from the certificate that matched? Or?
I mean, I personally wouldn't want the server to do this anyway, so I don't care.
I wonder if there was a question there for an additional property, which is a fingerprint of the matching key or something like that.
If you minute this, I'll add it in.
Okay. Yeah, I think DKG's comment does point to the general trouble with these things is you have a broad, you can go from very simple up to very complex depending on what the client wants to do, and it's kind of picking what this extension's for. As long as this has a good use case, that's fine. We do that, and then don't overcomplicate it, and then have separate stuff for doing.
Signed failed, again, depending what kind of information you want, you might want to add diagnostic describing what exactly failed, and
yes,
is everything fine except the certificate expired?
What
did the from not match? Again, there are multiple levels of this.
I don't know if it's should
for users. It's probably just one string.
This is Barry, I guess, but I'm always leery of that because it opens up all kinds of attack vectors if you start getting too specific about, you know, if signature verification failed, signature verification failed. And I don't really like trying to micro report that, well, it expired yesterday, which is okay, but if it expired a week ago, it's not okay.
This is DKG again. If I think of JMAP as like a sort of definition of a shim between a mail user agent and a UI, which in some cases I think it might be used as, and this is for the kind of mode where the user agent is doing all the stuff on the server basically, and you've just got a UI. I'll observe that in a lot of the mail user agents I've been working with recently, the move towards reporting signature status has been signed successfully versus no comment.
Right.
And so actually 3 of these states probably could be collapsed because if we're just talking about a UI scenario, because actually from the user's point of view, a failed signature doesn't mean anything more than an unsigned message.
Right.
And it's very difficult to communicate a failed signature as though it was any, like, signature fail is the same thing as an unsigned message.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't actually, it's not actionable by the user. So, but if this isn't about a UI split, then there's other reasons why you might want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just for UI, but I did have a very similar question of what is the client meant to do if it gets signed/failed? Like, what is the expectation there? Is it meant to tell the user, don't read this message at all, or not show it to the user, or just not show anything, as you said, and just display it as normal?
And a lot of this is related to the decision
This is
we made.
policy sometimes.
That's true.
Policy
Wow.
decisions and domains.
A lot of this is related to the decision we made in DChem not to make any assumptions if the signature verification failed, because you don't want to be able to use an attack that makes the verification fail as something that helps an attacker.
Yes, although in
There's all-
DKIM's case, that was partly because it gets the key from DNS. And so you had a request you could block, whereas if you already actually need to have to fetch the certificate and
It's
stuff. It could be
slightly different because in some environment you might require all messages to be signed. So actually, if you see unsigned, which is actually not a state here, that might be a problem. Or if it fails to verify, that again is a
It's true.
problem.
The bottom line is I think you have to treat any failure to verify a signature as though the message were unsigned. If you do anything else, you start going down bad paths.
But it's also true that, yes, you might have a policy that everything must be signed, anything else is, don't even show it, or, tell them this is, but yeah. Okay, so I think, actually, I suppose Alexi was going to update this a bit and bring it forward.
Yep, and
Sounds good.
again, we take this as a proposed thing to be added to the working group document that we want to adopt.
I think it seems reasonable.
Any
Yes,
objections?
objections to accepting this document as working group product. Clearly, it needs some updates, but that's what working group products do. So,
Okay, cool.
okay, I will send a message to the list.
Great. And just one other thing we could talk about very briefly. Benoit raised this, I was talking to him earlier today, the idea of an extension for getting the quota, which is not currently available and obviously is in IMAP with extension. Do you want to
So basically, as part of the mail JMAP specification, we have a quota exceeded exception. I don't remind the exact name, but we do return error when a quota is exceeded. And currently, a client has no idea of what that quota is. What we implemented at Linagora is an additional field as part of the mailbox that returns this information. So it mirrors a bit the IMAP specification, which I don't remember the RFC number, which is with the root of the quota and all the different resources with the allocated quota. And with all of this information, a JMAP client is able to aggregate this quota and display the quota, for example, for an account if all the mailbox belong to the same root. So I could propose a draft for it if there is some interest in the working group.
Yeah, speaking from the floor, I will be interested to have a look at this.
Yeah, I think given this is something obviously you can do in IMAP, it seems something that would be reasonable to do in JMAP, even though I don't know really any MUAs or generic MUAs that do show you the quota, which is a bit weird. Are there some?
Thunderbird.
Does it? Okay.
Chris Newman in Jabber says, I support work on a quota extension, but it may be tricky. Some sites want to aggregate quota for different data types.
Yes, we have that, and that is definitely one of the difficulties in making this generic enough to support all different use cases.
Actually, our model makes it generic because the quota are reported separately for each mailbox. So the way you manage and group the quota together on top of quota roots is actually not. You can support arbitrary quota grouping of mailbox.
But even mailbox, so for example, if you're using a kind of labels type approach where one message can be in multiple mailboxes, you may only count it once for your quota, even though it's in multiple mailboxes. So if you just add all the quota of mailboxes together, you end up with too high quota usage. And also similarly, I think, to what Chris Newman was saying, so you might have a single quota route that also encompasses other non-mail data types. So we have a single quota route that encompasses calendars and contacts as well as your mail and fast mail. So it's, yeah, the difficulty here is trying to be able to express all the different ways that different services manage their quota, I think.
Yeah, I think it's worth doing. It's just not going to be entirely trivial. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can easily construct very pathological cases. We need to think about it.
Yeah, but it's
Because,
worth
you know,
doing.
it's not clear how much IMAP details you want to actually express in JMAP.
Mm.
Maybe you want to express all of it, maybe some subset of it.
I guess really we want to be able to express what we need to for it to be useful to existing services, and preferably no more than that, because otherwise it's more complicated than it needs to be.
Bron, there's a couple of things here. One of which is I think we've got broad agreement that we want to undertake the work, and some of the finer details can be figured out once we've actually undertaken the work. And the other thing is back to the idea that a JMAP client is often a display shim over the data model. Mostly what the user cares about is, am I using 5% of my quota or 95% of my quota? They don't care about the exact details of how that's calculated. They just want a bar that shows approximate usage, and being exact to a byte doesn't matter. The server will still reject it if you're right at the edge.
In fact,
but it's nice to be able to see I'm only using 0.1% of my quota. I'm going to be fine.
yeah, that's a good point, I think. And actually, that makes an interesting potential other way of doing this, which is just you have one or more quota objects returned by the server up to the server, and it just says how big it is, how much you're currently using, and a label for it. Because that label is, you know, you tell the user, is this your mail quota? Is this your whole account quota? Whatever, and then client can share. I don't know. It certainly might actually be more useful to the user than this complicated thing that tells you exactly.
Translate it, internationalize labels, and various other things.
That is true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I'm just.
Yeah. All right. I think this needs some discussion on the list, but there's various ideas, but it would be useful if we can find a solution. Good. Okay. I think that's the end of the extensions I talk about. So I'm going to hand this over to Bron.
All right. Rechartering. Oh, that's all we've got there. So I sent this email through to the list. Sorry, I don't see an easy way to make this full screen, but I can plot this blob. Maybe there we go.
This blob.
Blob. So I emailed this to the list yesterday. Sorry for the very late delivery of it. I'm proposing that now that we are at delivery of core and mail, which were the initial documents that we specified, that we reach out to this group. Basically, the first few paragraphs are exactly the same because most things are the same. Hang on, is this the old version? Did I not push the new version? This is the old version. I suspect I haven't actually pushed the changes at all. Sorry. So yeah, once these ones have been completed, taking into account that there's value in having a single connection and single endpoint, the working group, I'm proposing that we now work on other extensions for related data types, including calendars, contacts, files, and that other extensions may be created to access the other features of IMAP and Civ, Quota being entirely within that scope as well. Saying that we should still be bound by the constraints that we're developing a protocol for synchronizing client to server, that we use existing IETF work where possible. So JS Calendar already exists as a calendaring format over JSON, and that we work with whatever IETF groups are defining data types in the areas that we're interested in transferring. And the core principles that the server doesn't do work that hasn't been requested of it, and that things are explicit rather than implicit where possible. So if the server is going to take further actions based on the data being uploaded, the client explicitly requests that rather than asks that it doesn't be done. And an example there is with calendaring scheduling, that the simple act of putting a scheduling object on the server causes the server to undertake scheduling actions based on who the authenticated user is and where they're putting the data automatically, and there's in some cases you can't even turn it off, and that the JMAP approach to things is more that if you want something done by the server, you ask for it, and if you don't ask for it, the default is not to do anything other than just store what's been uploaded.
So this may be a nit, but are you overloading the term extension?
Probably.
Would it make sense to use some different term along what Neil was suggesting, that you've got core and then you've got protocol specific things, segments, or something?
Yeah, Neil again. Yeah, I wouldn't consider like JMAP contacts, JMAP calendar to really be extensions. They are different data models that go on top. Extension to me is a small thing that does. Yeah, but that's like saying JMAP mail is an extension. Yeah, the new data. Yeah, like an extension is something that doesn't really stand on its own, but is an addition to one of the main data models that helps, like, quote, the SNMDN doesn't make any sense without the mail thing. Yeah, no, I know. I'm just, yes.
So on Jabber, Jim Fenton says, what would be the relationship between JMAP and StarDAV, CalDAV, etc., as a replacement for it?
Neil Jenkins, yes, absolutely. That's the idea. Is in the same way as JMAP is to IMAP, JMAP mail is to IMAP, I guess, really. JMAP calendar would be to CalDAV, JMAP contacts to CardDAV, and JMAP files in theory to WebDAV. And then you have a single consistent protocol for synchronizing all these bits of information, which is more efficient, better suited for mobile and all the other nice things that JMAP has as a generic thing, and makes it easier to work with, especially given, having contacts, calendars, and mail in the same app is very common. It would be much nicer if you have one protocol. And again, that also means you avoid the issues where my contacts work, but my calendars don't, because my config's slightly out in that respect, or the authentication needed is different, or anything like that. So we think it makes a lot of sense for this to be a single protocol. Also, then it competes properly with ActiveSync and other proprietary things like that, which part of their advantage is, yes, they have a single protocol for accessing all these different types.
So just back to that proposal by Kurt, or question by Kurt, what would you suggest we use this as an alternative term rather than extension?
As an alternative term, either data models, I don't know if that doesn't quite trip off the tongue nicely, but
just specification, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I'll have to think about it and see if something comes to mind.
From Jabber, Stefan Bush suggests capability as DKG. I'm not convinced by that because of IMAP's capabilities.
Yeah, I'm also wondering though, even given the guidelines of where does this sort of leverage other specifications, and what are the kind of core principles that governs a JMAP interaction with a server? I'm wondering if we need to bound the space a little bit more. I mean, do we want to talk about JMAP RT or something? I mean, or JMAP track? I mean, it's maybe not. I don't know.
With my AD hat on now, this is actually similar to what I was about to say. Is this seems like a lot of work potentially, and one thing which is not clear is priority of different items. For example, we probably still want to do JMAP extensions before other documents, unless we really collectively can think that there is enough bandwidth in the working group to work on all of them in parallel. So probably some text should be added about sequencing. The other thing I suggest is, I'm happy to discuss rechartering now. I suggest we don't recharter until the two main documents are past ISG review.
Okay.
Why?
It's a distraction.
To whom?
Well, to me as well, you know, because I'll have to argue with ISG why on earth we have to boil the whole ocean. And some of it might seem like that. So
fair.
you know,
That's fair.
I guess the question I don't want other area directors to ask is, you know, is this work complete? Why are you starting all this other stuff?
Well, I mean, it's easy enough to say the main documents are in last call, so here we go. But it's fair enough.
Yeah.
No problem.
The other, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead, Neil.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think we can keep it more constrained, because it's obviously always possible to recharge it again if you want to, rather than, yeah, it's better to have a focus. Personally, in terms of ordering, I would say JMAP calendars makes a fair bit of sense to do, because I don't think it's going to be too complex with JS calendar already in last call at CalExt as well. It is pretty much a combination of that data format plus JMAP core for the synchronization, and a small amount on top to talk about scheduling. It's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, to be honest, if we just add one calendar now and then recharter again, I don't think it's going to be a problem, especially if the working group has a good track record of completing stuff, which, you know.
Now I remember what it was. I'm concerned, speaking of data models, I'm concerned that we may be introducing circular dependencies here and going down the cluster route. That if we have these application spaces, for lack of a working term, that JMAP covers, and then we have extensions, all of which are built on core. Do the extensions apply to only specific application spaces or multiple, or do the application spaces depend on extensions, etc.?
Neil, again, I think the extensions proposed have been like, so WebSocket extension just extends core. It would make no difference which thing you use on top of it. I don't think there'll be any conflict. Whereas it's an alternative. Yes, you're right. It's not really extension, it's an alternative transport mechanism. Whereas like email/send-MDN is clearly only relevant to email. I understand your point, but to me, so far, the extensions have been very clear what they're doing and how they would interact.
Well, but so far it's also been a fairly constrained playing field. And if we open up the playing field, then I'm concerned that we may open the door to circular ambiguity.
Let's don't do that. Like allow circular ambiguity. I've highlighted the last bit, which is that the working group has to consider it to be related to email and compatible with the constraints to accept the work.
Yeah, which is a slightly odd one in some respects, in that yes, it's kind of related to email, but at the same time, the core doesn't say anything about email. Like, it doesn't have to be email, and that's why we're using it for other types as well. And then that was the point raised by Sudi on the list there, was that it's a bit weird in some ways that it still seems very email focused in this recharge.
Every program expands until it can read email. So
Well, yeah, and related to email is a pretty low bar. I mean, you could argue that voicemail or phone handling could be related to mail because it's related to contacts, which is related to mail, etc.
Yes, Neil. And in fact, in that respect, I agree, and I think perhaps a better approach would be just to explicitly state we're looking to expand this onto calendar as a data type. That's for the next kind of bit of work, or even calendar and contacts. Yeah, that would make sense. It's not talking about email as related or trying to be wishy-washy about it, but it's also then very specific and not encompassing the world of other things that you could do. If we want to do something else, well, that will be recharging again later. Calendar and contacts clearly makes the most sense and would be a really good thing to have together with email on this protocol. So if we focus on that and then minor extensions to the email bit, or then I think that encompasses all the things we actually want to do and keeps it more constrained.
Okay, as Alexi said, we can always recharter again once those are done. So in terms of timing, are we looking at rechartering Prague? Do you think that seems roughly right?
Probably before that, especially if we
I
are.
hope so.
I'm hoping that the two main documents can be in ISG review by the end of the year.
Right. So I was.
So then we can reach out in January.
Right. We throw a charter at you in January. Yeah.
So yeah, in the meantime, please edit it, post a new version. Just.
Having just stood up in the chairs meeting and said that we should keep our milestones up to date, us working group chairs. I've gone through and ticked done for submitting the documents describing the protocol. Since that's done, no one demanded a problem statement, so I've turned that off. The document for guidance for implementation of servers, we have a draft of that sitting outside IETF, don't we? Yeah.
On microphones, please.
Neil Jenkins again. I think Alexi had volunteered to write a document about translating between IMAP. He said he cannot deny that off microphone. That can be minuted. I have written a document which is on the jmap.io website, which is about data structures you could use to implement that, but that's different. This document was meant to be about translating between IMAP and JMAP, I believe.
Yeah, I was curious about the title there, saying that it's implementing IMAP servers, and it's like, why is that in our JMAP working group?
Yeah, I believe it was meant to be more about translation between IMAP and JMAP rather than implementing IMAP servers itself.
The question is whether we want to proceed with that document at this point, or whether we want to proceed with the other technical documents that we're working on. And then the second question is, if we do the latter, do we want to come back to this document or just strike it?
This was why the document was requested, was it specifically says in the charter that it needs to be implementable on top of an IMAP server, so guidance for how to make both of them possible.
I'm trying to state both with my AD hat and without. With AD hat on, I'm less concerned now, as I was back at the time, about ability for two to coexist, considering all the work in extra working group, which is trying to not quite backport, but add some features back to IMAP. So as far as actually, if such document were to be written, I think it would be useful. Somebody else wants to pick it up, that would be great too. I might find eventually some cycles to do this, so but I wouldn't.
I suggest we just change the milestone date on this to December 2020. Just push it out. Stick in milestones for the other documents we're accepting.
Yep.
And if we come back to that document, we do, and if not, we can eventually trash the milestone. But
okay, I'll be okay with that.
Yeah.
I'll put in milestones for the documents that we've accepted.
Well, we'll wait until we officially accept them,
Well,
which I've given a date of November 16th, next Friday.
we haven't already accepted one.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I'll put in a date for that one.
I think the MDN one is already.
Yes.
Yeah.
MDN's already been accepted, so I'll stick a milestone for that.
But I'm talking about WebSocket and SMIME are the
Yep.
two that we're still polling the working group on.
Yes. All right. So that covers rechartering, and we're on to any other business.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn? I see motions that appear to be looking for us to adjourn. I think we're adjourned.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody, and thank you, remote participants, for staying up a bit late
Early.
or a bit early, as the case may be. I think we're mostly West Coast U.S.,
Yeah.
which my reckoning is that it's about 1 a.m. No, about 11 p.m. West Coast time. So, or midnight, something like that. Midnight. Oh, Stefan Bosch is in the Netherlands, so yeah, it's some really screwed up time for him.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
Stefan.
Stefan.
All right.
Alrighty. I'll leave these live mics. So, can we kill the mics, please?